I want you to picture your best friend in the whole entire world. I'm not talking about the person you wasted time with hating on season 8 of Game of Thrones. I'm talking about your ride or die. In fact, you and this person served in the special forces together, stood side by side on the front lines of Afghanistan, would die just to save the other's life type of bond. Now I want you to imagine picking up a .45 caliber cannon and putting several slugs into their chest. Today's story is like a military soap on Lifetime, so you know it's gonna get strange. Pack an MRE, cadavers, because this one is gonna take a minute. For today's most recent story, we are going to have to break a rule and go all the way back to the year 2018, to a time when Notre Dame wasn't ash and Corona was just a beer. Sergeant First Class Mark Leshikar was always known for helping people. In fact, his mother would say that his desire to help those in need could be traced back all the way to when he was just a child on the playground, defending other kids from their bullies. Mark would discover his true calling after 9/11 when the tragedy impacted him so much that he now decided to join the military and defend his country. Mark would first enlist into the Air Force, where he would be selected for their honor guard. He would go on to join the National Guard and then the Army in 2009 as a combat engineer. By 2018, Mark would not only be a Green Beret, but perhaps even tougher, he would be a father, and a loving father at that. In fact, for his daughter's 5th birthday, he decided to take her where every little girl has the chance to become a princess, Disney World. During this birthday vacation, Mark's family would include the family of his friend and fellow soldier, William Lavigne II. This would be an added bonus for Mark's daughter, Milana, since she was best friends with William Lavigne's young daughter. Mark and William's families were so close, in fact, that young Milana would actually address her father's friend as Uncle Billy. The incident that I bring to you today occurred on March 21st, 2018. The families had just gotten back from their shared Disney vacation, and Mark was actually at William Lavigne's residence, not far from the military base they were both stationed at. And if you watched the last episode of The Hard Truth, then this military base you're already familiar with. It is none other than Fort Bragg. So Mark is at Lavigne's house, and they are both outside working on William's car. Milana and Lavigne's daughter are inside playing, when at some point, these two longtime friends get into some sort of argument. This altercation between two friends would get so intense that William would end up retreating into his house, effectively locking Mark outside. Now at this point, details become a little murky, but Mark's daughter is still inside, and she is witnessing all of this. Mark is now trying to get into William's house, which I can only assume is to retrieve his daughter that is still inside. But it would be William's daughter who would end up unlocking the door, letting him in. This is when Mark would enter the home, and William, close range, pulls out a gun, shoots Mark, killing him instantly right in front of his daughter, Milana. Mark was just 33 years old. William would ultimately walk free for killing his friend, as he claimed when Mark had entered his home, he had charged at William while brandishing a screwdriver. And it was at this point that William, in fear for his life, drew his weapon and defended himself. Now, it's not my job to speculate, but I'd say Mark had a good reason for re-entering that house, and that was obviously to collect his daughter. But as far as William being justified for killing Mark, well, the courts didn't find him guilty, so I suppose we will leave that there. However, let's make a note that the screwdriver that William had claimed Mark attacked him with was never found. But let's play devil's advocate, because on March 19th, just a few days before his death, on the trip back from Florida, Mark was said to have been acting oddly. Mark's wife would corroborate this by saying that Mark had been acting paranoid and worried that someone had been following them. It should also be known that Mark was assigned a desk job after receiving a brain injury from an IED that exploded close to him. Either way you spin it, the whole situation is sad, and a defense could be made for either side. On one end, you have Mark, who according to his family was self-medicating with tramadol and Valium and had been acting strangely leading up to his death. Or you have William Lavigne, who when was first questioned, lied about the incident, claiming Mark Leshikar had taken his own life, only to later recant, replacing that statement with the self-defense story. Regardless, that story would prevail, as William's actions would be deemed justifiable, And that's where the story would end. That is, until recently. Fast forward a couple of years and you'll soon learn why all of that is relevant now. December 2nd, 2020, found in a training field located in Fort Bragg were 2 bodies. And I'll give you one guess as to whom one of those bodies were. 37-year-old Master Sergeant William Lavigne II was found dead under suspicious circumstances alongside Army veteran Timothy Dumas, age 44. Not a lot of information is being released yet about the deaths, but this is what we do know. The bodies were found in a training area on base. However, the deaths were not linked to any training-like accident. In fact, they are now calling this a homicide. Lavigne worked on base, assigned to headquarters, and his death comes just 1 month after announcing investigations into the death of 21-year-old Enrique Roman Martinez, whose death was just featured in the last episode. Now, I don't mean to imply that these murders are related, because most likely they aren't. It's just insane to think that here you have this base with the population of a large town announce they are looking into the death of one of their own, and a month in, another is killed, who just so happened killed another 2 years ago. Are you following me here? And to circle back to what happened to Mark Leshikar in 2018, when his daughter Milana heard about Lavigne's death, she suddenly, for the first time, began opening up about the day she witnessed Lavigne kill her father. As a still very young Milana would end up saying that with Lavigne's death came the freedom to talk about it. Milana had been so afraid of Lavigne that she hadn't spoken about the day her father died, in fear that her Uncle Billy would kill her mommy too. I realize that this is a lot to take in, and I don't mean to insinuate that Lavigne had been in the wrong for defending himself against Leshikar. I'm just giving you the facts, and one of them being that young Milana was so devastated by her father's death, she quietly lived in fear up until the death of Lavigne. And it's sad. The whole thing is sad. I feel for the Leshikars. I feel for the Lavignes. And I can't leave out all those stationed at Fort Bragg who served alongside all those brave men who have been killed. As someone who comes from a paramilitary background, I could tell you, you look at those standing next to you as brothers and sisters. And sadly, this story just touched on 4 that served and died at the same base. So my condolences to the families of the Leshikars, the Lavignes, Martinez, Dumas, and those at Fort Bragg. It's just crazy to imagine these brothers in arms who had to go through basic training together, who got stationed together, deployed together, had to protect each other from hostiles in foreign lands together, snapping and killing one another. And for what reason? I don't know. I mean, perhaps an argument could be made that the number of personnel now living on base just exceeds the span of control and has become unmanageable. But Fort Bragg is not the only military base that has been placed under a microscope due to its personnel turning up murdered. Homicides and missing persons cases have peppered U.S. military bases all over this year alone. And this next case, you've probably heard about. On April 22nd, 2020, 20-year-old United States Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen disappeared while being stationed at Fort Hood in Texas. Vanessa was born in Houston and was part of a big, loving family. Growing up, Vanessa played soccer and loved to jog, so she was in great physical health well before she even joined the military. When she graduated high school in 2018, she did so at the top 15% of her class. This achievement made her 5 siblings and parents, who immigrated from Mexico, very proud. And it seemed like Vanessa was going to keep making her family proud when she enlisted in the military straight out of high school. Vanessa would quickly be promoted from first class to specialist in no time, and then she would disappear. Vanessa was last seen around 1300 hours, or 1 p.m. on the 22nd of April, in the parking lot of her unit, which was the headquarters of the 3rd Cavalry Regiment, or 3CR. Her car keys, bank card, ID, and barracks keys were the only items found belonging to Vanessa. But aside from those items found, it was as if Vanessa had just vanished. Many law enforcement agencies would scour the 340 square miles of Army post. They interviewed over 300 individuals and spent over 10,000 hours searching for Vanessa. But aside from the items found in the armory where she worked, there was no trace of Vanessa. Shortly before her disappearance, Vanessa had told her family about an unnamed sergeant who had been sexually harassing her on base. Now, her family did urge Vanessa to report this individual, but she would just respond she was going to put a stop to it. Vanessa's family would come to authorities with this information, but authorities, they already had a suspect in mind. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be until June 30th when officials would make a tragic break in the case. Contractors working on a fence in the area would discover partial human remains along the River Leon in Belton. The area in which the remains had been discovered had actually been an area of interest to authorities. Previously, law enforcement had searched the area with cadaver dogs but turned up nothing, as her remains had been buried beneath soil and concrete. Unfortunately, the remains would turn out to be Vanessa's. However, fortunately for the investigation, wildlife would end up digging up the remains, allowing the discovery to be made. And this find would apply just enough pressure to solve the case. When detectives went back to look at those who had last seen Vanessa, they would focus on a previous suspect. And that suspect was fellow specialist Aaron Robinson, who was 20 years old, same age as Vanessa. See, previously on the 18th, 2 witnesses have claimed to have seen Robinson struggling with a large box outside of the armory the day Vanessa went missing. When Robinson was first interviewed, he had given law enforcement permission to go through his phone, and those phone records would place Robinson and his girlfriend along the Leon River on the 23rd of April. This being one of the reasons for searching the location prior to finding Vanessa's remains. But after interviewing Robinson's girlfriend and searching the Leon River to no avail, without a body, they couldn't convict Robinson. But that would all change now that they had Vanessa's remains. And before confronting Robinson, they were going to give one more crack at his girlfriend. Robinson's girlfriend, Cecily Aguilar, was the estranged wife of another Fort Hood soldier unrelated to the case. Now, at first, Cecily would deny the couple's involvement, but once the remains were found in the location they had previously been, Cecily would admit to officers that Robinson had called her on the 22nd and asked her to help him dismember a body, and that body was Vanessa Guillen. So it goes like this. Robinson had entered the armory on the 22nd and murdered Vanessa with a hammer. He then placed her body in a trunk and transported her to the Leon River. He then got Cecily to help him dismember and bury her body. Now, Cecily would end up cooperating with police this time around. She would even go as far as to text Robinson in front of the police in hopes he would incriminate himself. She would send him messages like, "They found the remains." But Robinson would not respond to these texts. Instead, he would leave base unobserved, even though soldiers were under strict orders to remain in their barracks due to COVID-19. Robinson would flee to Killeen, Texas, until he was eventually tracked down by officers in the early hours of June 30th. But instead of being taken into custody, Robinson had a different plan. He put a pistol to his head and took his own life. As for Cecily Aguilar, she was arrested by Rangers and charged with 1 count of conspiracy to tamper with evidence. Though it may not feel like justice has been served in the brutal death of Vanessa Guillen, her case has raised awareness for sexual harassment within the U.S. military. Protests and investigations would continue, even with the slogan, "I am Vanessa Guillen," trending on Twitter by those fighting to put a stop to the abuse. As of December 8th, 2020, 14 senior officers to squad-level personnel would be suspended or relieved of duty altogether for their failure in leadership. Although Vanessa's death was cruel, untimely, and tragic, it did bring attention to a deeper problem that spans throughout military bases worldwide. So that is enough hard truth for one day. Sadly, I'm sure there will be more come tomorrow. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to be kept up to date with future episodes, just give a like and subscribe. And if there's any recent news you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments. Be good to another and stay safe. Until next time.